There is a number your body keeps track of quietly every single day, and almost no one ever tells you what it means. It shapes your mood before you wake up. It influences how well you sleep tonight. It might even be connected to something as serious as your risk of cancer decades from now. That number is how often you ejaculate. And whether the answer is once a day, once a week, or almost never, your body is responding in ways that most men have never been told about. So today we are going to ask a question that sounds simple but is actually one of the most misunderstood topics in men's health. What really happens inside your body when you ejaculate every single day? Before we go further, let's be clear about something. This is not a video about shame, and it is not a video about permission. It is a video about biology. Your body does not care about taboo. It only cares about chemistry, hormones, blood flow, and recovery. So we are going to strip away the awkwardness and look at this the way a physiologist would, calmly, honestly, and with the evidence laid out in front of us. By the end, you will understand not just what happens, but why it happens, and what it might mean for the way you live, sleep, love, and age. Let's start at the moment of release itself, because what happens in the seconds after orgasm is far more complex than most people realize. Your brain does not simply relax. It ignites. A cascade of neurochemicals floods your system almost instantly. Dopamine surges through your reward pathways, the same circuitry involved in motivation, pleasure, and even addiction. Oxytocin, sometimes nicknamed the bonding hormone, rises sharply, which is part of why physical intimacy can create such a strong emotional pull toward another person. Endorphins, your body's built-in painkillers, join the mix, dulling discomfort and creating a sense of calm that can linger for minutes or even hours. And serotonin, the neurotransmitter most associated with steady, stable mood, gets a meaningful boost as well. In other words, in a matter of seconds, your brain runs through nearly every major feel-good chemical it has access to. That is not a coincidence. It is evolution's way of making a biologically costly act feel irresistibly rewarding. But here is where it gets interesting, and where most conversations about this topic stop far too early. The question is not whether these chemicals are released. They are, every time. The real question is what happens when this cycle repeats daily, week after week, month after month. Does the body simply keep responding the same way, or does something shift? Let's talk about sleep first, because this is one of the most consistently reported effects, and one of the most biologically fascinating. After orgasm, prolactin levels rise substantially, sometimes many times higher than baseline. Prolactin is closely tied to feelings of drowsiness and satisfaction, which is part of the reason so many people feel an almost immediate pull towards sleep afterward. Combine that with the calming effects of oxytocin and the pain-relieving properties of endorphins, and you get a kind of natural, built-in sedative response. For someone who struggles to switch off a racing mind at night, this physiological wind-down can genuinely support easier, deeper sleep. And better sleep does not stay isolated in the bedroom. It ripples outward into memory consolidation, emotional regulation, immune function, and even how your body manages blood sugar the next day. A single biological event, repeated daily, quietly touching almost every system you rely on to function. Before we move further into the body, it is worth pausing on something cultural, because much of the confusion around this topic has nothing to do with biology at all. For generations, ejaculation and masturbation carried a heavy weight of myth. In the 19th century, some physicians genuinely believed that ejaculation drained a man's vitality, weakened his muscles, and even dulled his intelligence, ideas that sound absurd today but shaped medical advice for decades. Traces of that thinking still echo in modern culture, in half-joking comments about semen retention boosting testosterone, sharpening focus, or building physical strength. Actual hormonal research tells a more modest story. Short-term abstinence does not meaningfully raise testosterone beyond a brief, temporary spike, and there is no solid evidence that regular ejaculation depletes a man's baseline hormone levels or drains his physical vitality. Understanding this history matters, because a lot of the anxiety men feel around this topic was never really about biology in the first place. It was inherited from outdated beliefs that modern science has quietly moved past. Now let's move to something most people have never even considered: your circulatory system. Arousal and orgasm are, in a very real physiological sense, cardiovascular events. Heart rate increases, blood vessels dilate. Blood flow surges not only to the pelvic region, but throughout the body. This process, called vasodilation, is the same general mechanism doctors look at when discussing heart health, blood pressure regulation, and even erectile function itself, since healthy erections depend heavily on healthy blood vessels. Some researchers have described regular sexual activity as a kind of low-intensity cardiovascular exercise, a repeated stress and release pattern on the vascular system that over time may support better circulatory function. It is not a replacement for actual exercise, but it is a reminder that this act is not isolated to reproduction. It is deeply woven into how your whole circulatory network operates. Here is where the story takes a turn that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. For decades, there was a quiet assumption in medicine that more frequent ejaculation might somehow strain the prostate or increase cancer risk. Large-scale research has actually pointed in the opposite direction. One long-running study out of Harvard, tracking tens of thousands of men over close to 2 decades, found that men who ejaculated more frequently, specifically around 21 or more times per month, had a notably lower incidence of prostate cancer compared to men who ejaculated far less often. The leading biological explanation is almost mechanical in nature. The prostate produces fluid that becomes part of semen, and frequent ejaculation may help clear this fluid more regularly, potentially reducing the buildup of cellular debris, inflammatory byproducts, or carcinogenic compounds that could otherwise linger in the gland over time. This is not a guarantee, and it does not mean daily ejaculation prevents cancer outright. Correlation in large population studies is not the same as absolute proof of causation. But it is a striking enough pattern that urologists now talk about ejaculation frequency as one small piece of the broader picture of prostate health, alongside diet, genetics, and regular screening. And the surprises do not stop there. Your immune system may be listening in on this process too. Some research has shown that sexual arousal and orgasm can temporarily increase levels of immunoglobulin A, an antibody that acts as one of your body's first lines of defense against viruses and bacteria, particularly in the respiratory tract. Combine that with the well-documented relationship between chronic stress and immune suppression, and a picture starts to emerge. Chronic stress floods your body with cortisol, which over time can blunt immune response. Orgasm, through its powerful stress-reducing hormonal cascade, may counteract some of that suppression. It is not a cure for illness, and no responsible source would ever claim that. But it hints at something profound, that sexual health and immune health are not separate categories in the body. They are quietly intertwined. So far, this sounds like an overwhelmingly positive story. Better mood, better sleep, better circulation, a potentially lower cancer risk, a small immune boost. But if daily ejaculation were universally beneficial with no downside at all, this conversation would not exist. So let's turn to the other side of the picture, the side that rarely gets discussed with the same scientific seriousness. The first thing worth understanding is the difference between a habit and a compulsion, because this distinction matters more than almost anything else in this entire topic. A habit is something you choose. It fits into your life without controlling it. A compulsion is something that starts to control you. If daily ejaculation happens because you enjoy it, it relaxes you, and it does not interfere with your responsibilities, relationships, or self-image, there is nothing inherently unhealthy about that pattern. But if the urge starts to feel less like a choice and more like a demand, if you find yourself doing it despite not wanting to, or if it begins eating into time, focus, or emotional bandwidth that you need elsewhere, that is a meaningfully different situation. Psychologists who study compulsive sexual behavior point out that the issue is rarely the act itself. It is the loss of control around the act and the emotional consequences, like guilt or shame, that often follow. This connects directly to the second issue, which is the use of ejaculation as an emotional coping mechanism. Because the hormonal payoff is so immediate and so powerful, it is remarkably easy for the brain to start reaching for it as a shortcut whenever stress, anxiety, boredom, or sadness shows up. In small doses, this is not dangerous. Human beings use all kinds of small rituals to regulate difficult emotions. The concern arises when it becomes the only tool in the toolbox. If ejaculation becomes the default response to every uncomfortable feeling, it can quietly crowd out other coping strategies like physical movement, conversation with someone you trust, creative outlets, or simply sitting with a feeling long enough to understand it. The emotion gets temporarily muted, but the underlying source, a stressful job, a lonely period, unresolved anxiety, never actually gets addressed. Over time, that pattern can leave someone feeling strangely empty even though, in the moment, the act itself felt good. Then there is a more physical concern, one that matters specifically for men who are trying to conceive. Sperm production is a continuous process, but full replenishment of sperm concentration after ejaculation takes roughly 2 to 3 days. Daily ejaculation does not stop sperm production, but it does mean that each individual ejaculation tends to contain a lower concentration of sperm than one that follows a few days of abstinence. For most men, this detail is biologically irrelevant. It has no meaningful impact on daily life, mood, or general health. But for couples actively trying to get pregnant, fertility specialists often recommend spacing ejaculations out to roughly every 2 to 3 days around the fertile window, simply to maximize sperm concentration at the moment it matters most. There is also a subtler, more psychological pattern worth understanding, which involves desire itself. It seems almost paradoxical, but some men who ejaculate very frequently report a gradual decline in spontaneous desire over time. Part of the explanation lies in how reward circuitry works. When a rewarding stimulus is repeated very frequently, the brain can become somewhat less sensitive to it, requiring more stimulation to achieve the same sense of satisfaction. Add to this the natural refractory period, the recovery window every man experiences after orgasm before renewed arousal is possible, and you get a system that, when constantly triggered, can settle into a lower baseline of desire. Interestingly, many men who intentionally take a short break from ejaculation report a noticeable rebound in both sensitivity and desire afterward, which suggests this effect, when it happens, tends to be temporary rather than permanent. Finally, there is a pattern that deserves honest attention because it affects intimate relationships directly. The connection between frequent, rapid masturbation and later difficulties with premature ejaculation or performance-related anxiety. If a man repeatedly trains his body to reach climax as quickly as possible, often through fast, goal-focused masturbation, that pattern can become deeply conditioned. The nervous system essentially learns a shortcut. The challenge is that this shortcut does not always translate well into partnered intimacy, where a slower, more responsive pace is often desired. This mismatch can create frustration, which can spiral into performance anxiety, and performance anxiety itself is one of the most common psychological contributors to both premature ejaculation and situational erectile difficulty. The irony is striking. The very act meant to bring pleasure can, if approached in a narrow and rushed way, inadvertently create tension around future intimacy. It is also worth acknowledging how much this entire picture shifts across a man's lifetime, because a 22-year-old and a 55-year-old are not operating with the same biological baseline. In younger men, refractory periods tend to be shorter, testosterone levels tend to be higher, and the body generally recovers more quickly between ejaculations, which is part of why daily frequency feels effortless for some men in their 20s and far more draining for others decades later. As men age, testosterone gradually declines, recovery time lengthens, and sleep architecture itself changes, all of which can alter how a daily pattern actually feels in practice. This is not a story of decline so much as a story of recalibration. What felt sustainable at one stage of life may need adjusting at another, and that adjustment is not a sign of a problem. It is simply the body evolving the same way appetite, energy levels, and sleep needs evolve with age. Stress also plays a far bigger role in this story than most people realize. A demanding job, a new baby, financial pressure, or a difficult relationship can all shift how the body responds to ejaculation, sometimes turning what used to feel restorative into something closer to a pressure valve, used more out of tension than genuine desire. Recognizing that shift rather than judging it is often the first step toward understanding whether a current pattern is genuinely serving someone's well-being. So where does all of this leave us? The truth is that there is no universal number that applies to every man on Earth. Human bodies are not identical machines running on a single, standardized schedule. Age, stress levels, relationship status, hormonal health, sleep quality, and even genetics all influence how someone's body responds to daily ejaculation. For one man, a daily rhythm might genuinely support better mood, better sleep, and a sense of emotional balance. For another man, the very same frequency might edge into compulsive territory, quietly reinforcing anxiety rather than relieving it. Neither of these outcomes is inherently right or wrong. They are simply different responses from different nervous systems, shaped by different life circumstances. What actually matters, according to most physicians and sexual health researchers, is not the number itself, but the relationship a person has with that number. Is it a source of comfort, connection, and stress relief, or has it become a source of guilt, urgency, or avoidance? Does it coexist peacefully with work, relationships, and personal goals, or does it quietly compete with them for time and mental energy? These questions matter far more than any statistic pulled from a study, because they get at something studies cannot fully measure: how a person actually feels about their own body and their own choices. Perhaps the most valuable takeaway from all of this is not a rule to follow, but a shift in perspective. Ejaculation is not simply a reproductive act happening in isolation. It is a full-body event, touching your hormones, your cardiovascular system, your immune response, your sleep architecture, and your emotional regulation all at once. Understanding that complexity does not mean overanalyzing every intimate moment of your life. It means recognizing that your body is constantly communicating with you through mood, through energy, through sleep quality, through desire itself, and that learning to listen to those signals, rather than chasing or avoiding a specific number, might be the real marker of a healthy relationship with your own body. If something about your pattern ever feels confusing, distressing, or out of your control, that is not a topic to sit with alone in silence. It is a completely normal, medically valid conversation to bring to a doctor or a licensed therapist, the same way you would bring up any other question about how your body works. In the end, the most powerful thing this kind of knowledge can give you is not a target to hit every day, but the ability to understand your own body a little more clearly than you did before you pressed play.